there is a chance that you, dear viewer, are suffering from amnesia. You may not know that you're suffering from it. That's one of the, the terrible things about amnesia. But even if you're the sort of person that pays attention to politics and follows what's going on, it is possible that through the natural flow of time and new developments, you've sort of forgotten about some of the ways that things used to be. And Donald Trump might actually be relying on that because he's constantly posting things like, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And he seems to seriously think that some of you might be worse off than you were in the fall of 2020, which was hell. I was employed, okay? I was living with a person that I loved, and it was still kind of hell. So I can only imagine for most of you that was really bad times. But he doesn't think that you'll remember it that way. And the thing is, a lot of you probably don't. It's been 4 years. It's easy to forget, not just the pandemic, but the attempt to overturn the election and January 6th and the fact that we were years into a trade war with China and we'd lost hundreds of thousands of jobs and a whole bunch of GDP and just the daily brain shredding news like him drawing hurricane paths in Sharpie and him falling in love with North Korean dictators and just the constant assaults on your bank account and your brain and your relationship and your rights. And I don't think, like a lot of people I think have negative views of Donald Trump. If you look at it, they don't see him as favorably as they do like a Kamala Harris or something. So some of that remains, but I don't think that people really remember how bad it was. And that could be having an effect on this election.
A storm is tearing up the digital media industry. Only our audience can save us in these difficult times. Help us reach our goal of 100,000 new members at tyt.com/team.
I just think it's an interesting thing to think about for a few minutes, Garrison. I'm curious what you think about the mental legacy that's left behind of the first Trump term in people's brains.
Okay, so there is so much going on in this country all the time that I can understand why someone might feel might have a little bit of amnesia, right? Like there has been so much going on. But what I will remind you, and I thought about this after the inauguration, it felt like Trump took up so much space in my life, and it was all against my will. It was always against my will. This guy was like, it was always a tweet about something. It's like, oh my God, we have to hear about another tweet from Donald Trump. And then he'd say something, or he'd push a global kind of leader out of the way to get to the front of the picture line. It was just like all of these little things every day. And it became people's personalities. Like you might recall that you might see like right now it's an election year. So folks are here for Trump, they're all in. And so they're kind of like, showing a lot of support for him. But you must remember that back in like 2018, 2019, being a Trump supporter was like a personality for folks. It was everything, everywhere. And that's where I think a lot of Americans really resonate with this message of like, we're not going back. Like if you spend even just a few moments thinking about what that was, let alone the pandemic and the mishandling of the pandemic. Like if you think about the way that he took up so much space in your life and in the media, it was just exhausting. And I hope that folks can kind of remember that because I think it was a lot of the reason why folks turned out to vote in 2020.
It was very exhausting, and just constantly being confronted with the latest thing was rough. And I want to apologize for being the purveyor of many of those updates to people on a daily basis. I tried to make them fun, but it was rough. I think a lot of people wanted to get away. I went to the Arctic for 2 months to get away. I went on a sealing vessel with no internet for multiple weeks to get away, and so it was rough times. And I hope, as you say, that people don't want to go back. But it is amazing how the capability that we have to forget. David Korn writes, is quoting historian George Santayana saying, humans are really good at compartmentalizing things in the past, and Americans appear to be especially good at that. We don't keep track of history very well. And that is totally true. But I'll also say, to me, it's wild that people have forgotten what the pandemic was like, but it's equally wild how during it, they were willing to ignore how bad it was. Like they weren't just allowing history to be rewritten, they were allowing it to be side written as it was happening. And I do think that there's a weird thing about our media and our political culture that makes us bizarrely, uniquely susceptible to that. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's this term called being like a cognitive miser, where you don't really want to adjust the way you think. You'd rather just kind of hold on to the way that you view things. And one of the lessons I learned going to the RNC this summer was that we all live in these really kind of segregated, and I don't mean by race, but I mean like ideologically kind of separate and segregated worlds and media ecosystems. And so the media that folks on the right are getting about what that time meant and how it was is totally, it's almost like a psyop. It's totally different than what I remember, or the way I experienced, or even the way I might make something that kind of communicates how things were at that time. You have to kind of remember that like humans are humans, and we're convincible, and we exist in these kind of silos, and so there is like a group of folks here in this country who look back very favorably on the Trump years. And that certainly wasn't everyone's experience. And so I just kind of hope to introduce a little bit of empathy and a little bit of kind of like communal kind of, consciousness into this conversation.
Yeah, I'll end with this on the pandemic experience. So we did the show at home. I did it from my living room for like 6 months or whatever.
Yeah.
And just like watching, we came together for, I think it was like 6 days as a nation. We were all together. We're gonna fight this thing. And then the day by day efforts to get people to ignore it and to not participate. I remember Tucker Carlson for like a month took it super seriously.
Right.
And was like, obviously you have to wear a mask. Obviously you have to do this. And then they were like, oh, people don't like that. That's actually tiring. So you don't have to do anything.
Yep.
And just watching millions of Americans simultaneously hold in their minds, this is a Chinese bioweapon intentionally released to kill all of us. And it's so bad that if you see anyone on the streets that even looks Chinese, you should harass them.
Right.
And also it's utterly irrelevant and you should do literally nothing to avoid getting it. And they believe that, but that makes sense still to them.
Okay, this is maybe a bit dangerous. And I never really get to talk about this, but I had this idea that they just branded the pandemic wrong. Like if they just said this was a war on COVID, you'd see everyone in like military grade masks, right? Like
they should have done the camo, like the Harris Walls
masks with like hand sanitizer in like, mini AK-47s, like it just would have been a whole different, we'd have saved like so many lives if they just branded it differently. Instead, it was like both a problem internationally and not a problem domestically. Strange.
Yeah, whatever it needed to be at any given moment. Thanks for watching our video. Did you know that you can support our show by becoming a subscriber? Just click the subscribe button and also ring the bell so that you get notifications when we're live or when we post new content.